Uh, we have titled this talk as Biocultural Diversity in Monsoon Asia, the forests, and the Mekong. For all of us, Professor Prasenjit Duara does not need any introduction at all. He's a seeker, an inspiring scholar. Uh, he was born and educated in India and received his PhD in Chinese history from Harvard University. Uh, he was previously professor and chair of the Department of History and chair of Committee on Chinese Studies at the University of Chicago. Then he became a Raffles Professor of Humanities and Director Asia Research Institute at National University of Chicago. He has published a number of books. One of my favorite books is Engagement on Modernity, Sovereignty and Authenticity, uh, Monsoon and East Asia University, East Asia Model. And he has edited many books. One of my favorite is Decolonization Now and Then. Today we are nurturing this talk titled Biocultural Diversity in Monsoon Asia, the Forests and the Mekong. We are going to understand some deep reflections by him on deforestation and biocultural management. Now I request Professor Anand Kumar Giri to give a kind of brief introduction of the topic. And also we are holding this dialogue for celebrating the scholarship on who had done a kind of outstanding social theory building of Asian with Asian quest, and we are also celebrating these scholars. Professor Amit Kumar Sharma has joined us. Two of other scholars will join very soon. Now I request Professor Anand Kumar Giri to give a kind of brief introduction.
So, thank you, Randir. Today is our Foundation Day, Viswanidam Center for Asian Blossoming. October 3 is also the calendar birthday of Chittaranjan Das. Chittaranjan Das is a deep seeker, writer, translator, and a many-sided transformative person in the modern world. He was born in 1923, and we were with him on his centenary in 2003. So his birthday is also our Viswanidam Center Foundation Day. Viswanidam emerged as an aspiration kind of 10, 15 years ago. And it got concretized in terms of regular dialogues from May, June 2020. So from then on, every Sunday and sometimes every Wednesday, we have held dialogues on varieties of themes and challenges. Professor Brisson also has joined us in one or two such occasions. And we also, with Viswanidam, we have taken some initiatives in engaging with contemporary thinkers. For example, we have initiated a JPS Ubroi Memorial Lecture. Professor Ubroi is a great social theorist and thinker. He left his body January this year. We also have initiated a Manoranjan Mohanty Viswanidam annual lecture that was presented 2 days ago, 2 to 3 days ago by our Professor Mark Jurgensmeyer, and it was chaired by Professor Beatriz Bisio from Brazil. And we also are holding Andre Bete annual lecture, and Professor Bete became 90 this September 30. and that was presented by Professor Surendra Munshi. From these three lectures, we could note that we are humbly interested in engaging with both contemporary thinkers, living thinkers, as well as those who are not with us any longer. It is in that spirit we are also going to have a Viswanidam annual Fred Dallmayr lecture. Professor Fred Dallmayr, who studied at Duke University, Professor Duara, and a great thinker of our times. So October 18th is his birthday. So this is our journey of Viswanidam. And what we have done in Viswanidam, just to get a little bit of our sense of activities, I would beg your indulgence for 2 to 3 minutes. I would invite Minati to share a little thing about our work in the last year. Just 4 5 minutes, and then we would begin our Viswanidam Foundation Day lecture, please. Minati? Okay, I think she's taking some time. So then we would now go straight to our this year's Viswanidam Foundation Day lecture presented by Professor Prasenjit Duara. And I have also been deeply touched by Professor Duara's book, The Crisis of Asian Modernity. And what I find in my humble reading, an openness to transcendence in Professor Duara's work. And with the difficult challenges of history, geopolitics, and there is still a touch of transcendence and what is so important. And even in this lecture, the complexities of the river, the destruction, but all the epistemological question that Professor Duara is bringing. And we are grateful to you, Professor Duara. And please keep us in your good spirit and inspire us, our effort. So, Professor Duara, please.
With the story of the elephants mission, and the goal is to really explore not so much the elephants, it's just the story, but the capitalist nation state system's impact. And I call this nation state system the epistemic engine, its impact on biocultural diversity of rainforests and regions. Now, in 2020, 17 elephants from left their habitat. 17 elephants left their habitat and in southern Yunnan, in Sichuan-Panna, if any of you have been there, and crossed the river to travel 500 kilometers towards Kunming, which is the capital. And in Kunming, there was the conference on global biodiversity. So they traveled 500 miles seeking their preferred foods, grass, leaves, etc. And it happened to be at a time just 2 months before the global meeting on biodiversity, and the Chinese authorities were able to induce them to return to their original habitat. But you know, the reason that they left their habitat was because their habitat, which had all kinds of biodiverse plants, was now covered with tea and rubber plantations, which apparently didn't suit them very well. So they went looking for food, and they. I've also joked that they may have actually been sent to uh, to Kunming to present their petition about the loss of biocultural diversity. This is just them taking rest, by the way. The picture is not just okay, this is the area of the Himalayan rivers and forests, rainforests, and the elephant journey. Now, you are familiar with this part of the map, which shows the Brahmaputra, which shows really the 9 or 10 rivers that originate on the Tibetan plateau and that really sustain about 2 billion people. Now, we also know that glacial melting, river diversion, dam building, etc., endangering the sources of livelihoods of hundreds of millions. Now, this is the forested area that I'll be talking about, this green area, not Assam, even though I'm from there, but it's a closely related region. And this is the Mekong River that goes through this deep green belt, which is and ends up here in Vietnam. Most of this is Cambodia and Laos and Thailand, but it ends up in this deltaic region of Vietnam. Can you all hear me? No?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. I also showed the, how do I go back? Oh, I also showed the elephants, the journey that they took. This is the southern part of Yunnan. This is the part of Assam and Nagaland and so on. And this is the journey, oh, this is Myanmar, I'm sorry, mostly. And this is the journey that they took almost to Kunming. And you can see the dates out there and how they were induced back. Okay. So the story is basically about extraction, dam building, and what's happening to the natural diversity around there. Industrial extraction leads to extinction, reduction, and displacement, not only of biodiversity, but also of local and indigenous communities, as well as their local knowledge. I think this is one of the most important things because, we'll come to that in a second. They had the capacity to manage these natural resources sustainably for future generations. So, and let it be noted that the rainforests of monsoon Asia, together with the Amazon, are among the largest natural carbon sinks in the world. So we need them. The world cannot survive or reach a tipping point if these great absorbers disappear. The forest role for water can be seen in three main aspects, right? One, the hydrological cycle, or one can call it the forest to be the hydrological sponge to prevent flood erosion and so on. Second, what forests do is that they filtrate and trap the sediments that go into the river. Otherwise, we would be heavily sedimented. And thirdly, they reduce water-related hazards like erosion with their roots that trap the earth all across the forest. Forests and rivers are best thought to be protected and defended by local or indigenous communities of eco people immediately dependent on these commons for their livelihood. This is Professor Gadgil who called them, I think, the eco people. Danielle Conversy calls them exemplary communities of sustainability. And in fact, this is borne out by the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous people and members of the Global Steering Committee for the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, which reports that mapping reveals the most successful or the best kept rainforests are in areas where rights of indigenous people are respected. This shows that they're the best stewards and custodians of rainforests. Now, what is the epistemic engine? This is a concept that I developed for another paper, but I find it useful for all of my papers actually nowadays. So I have to explain it a little bit. How does it impact the rainforests and regions of and rivers of this region? What the epistemic engine is, and I have a figure for it, is the dynamic circulatory. By circulatory, I mean, nations imitate each other to get ahead. They're the circulatory force among global nation states, which drives accelerating time. Time goes faster and faster, as I'm sure you have noticed outside Vishwanidam, I imagine, the accelerating time of modernity. And it often confuses natural sequences and times, right? Now, materially, what is the epistemic engine? It is an assemblage of states and capitalist structures which are unceasingly and competitively seeking resources, markets, and profits globally. Here I draw on several different authors, but Giovanni Arrighi, who had been at Johns Hopkins, is one of the most important. He sees the connection between states and capitalist markets and capitalist investors, and the search for markets for materials and for the sale. But so that's what it is materially. Cosmologically, the epistemic engine is based on a global understanding of the Enlightenment dualism. That is the dualism between the subject and the object, right? The subject being the human here who has replaced God, and the object being all of nature. And the idea is more or less mastery or conquest of nature in the name of progress, right? So progress is a very important word in the epistemic engine. Epistemically, we know I use the Foucauldian power knowledge continuum. In Foucauldian regime of knowledge is one which does not separate the true from the false, but what may be acceptable knowledge. What are the conditions of possibility of something happening, right? And here we see very clearly what is the central value is humans, and it is not nature centric. If it had been nature centric, where you allow humans to work with nature to sustainably and enhance it, that may have been an important form of power knowledge. And what is the vehicle of the epistemic engine? The epistemic engine is the nation form. The vehicle is the nation form. That is the territorial, identitarian, and exclusive nation state. And this has been legitimating the world order since the 19th century by different countries through adaptive reproduction. The goal of progress is framed by competition between nations over control over global resources, which has historically been the fuel for the engine, and it has left its exhaust on the planet as we see destruction all around us. So here's a picture of the epistemic engine. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. What you see on the left side are the different cosmologies, right? Here is the enlightened cosmology. Here is what I have, well, because that editor wanted it as hyper-humanist, but we can say more than human cosmology, maybe nature-based cosmology down here, which is really, in a sense, outside the epistemic engine. So the Enlightenment cosmology really shapes the world order and world politics. We see that how this affects the engine, that it's the carrier, its motor is the nation state system, and this affects the world order, which is often things like the United Nations and their agencies, as well as developed corporations and so on, and who have a legitimate place in the engine. And they shape really world politics, or mostly. Now, there are other factors as well. There are certain worldviews, say, based on religion or based on historical experiences or something, that don't automatically connect with the Enlightenment cosmology. They make a certain difference, but they too um, have to go through the epistemic engine in order to have an influence. Sometimes they can go directly here. But what I want to focus on is the hyperhuman or more than humanist cosmology, which is, of course, reflects many religious and environmental movements, and often the combination of the two, which I expect you are all part of in some ways. You too have you too come to it from different worldviews, histories, religions, irreligious experiences. And sometimes this or other than human cosmology can shape their activities and world politics, like Greta, what is her name? Anyway, directly into world politics. And sometimes you have to go to go through the epistemic engine. And my ultimate thought is that there's no point trying to be extremely revolutionary and go outside the system. I think we can also stretch the system to make it, at least to put nature in a more central place there. Okay, now I'm already late for in this talk, but China, we know, has had a long history of what many people call sort of environmental degradation. Mark Elvin, the great sinologist, has a title of an essay called 3,000 Years of Unsustainable Growth. If you think of this, this is a very ironic kind of comment. How can you have growth for 3,000 years and then call it unsustainable? What he means is that somehow they managed, mostly by returning human consumption into night soil into the land, transferring it to the land, and keeping the nutrients there. And these, despite catastrophic famines throughout these 3,000 years, the land was sustained until 1800 or so, when the population became far too bad. But I'm not going to talk about China's environment mostly. It is, although it has been known now for renewables and so on, but for about the last 30 years, much environmental degradation. There were many pockets of forests and water, such as China's sacred mountains like Mount Tai. There are many of them around Buddhist monasteries and Taoist temples and so on. Now, what we find is that there were many villages across a wide belt in southern China which conserved what are called feng shui forests, that is, wind and water forests. It's a kind of sacred forest of old growth trees around the village to protect the hydrological and ecological resources critical to community survival and well being. Christopher Coggins and his collaborators have recently extended their research to survival and role of sacred forests across East, Southeast, and South Asia. I have a little, I think, introduction or afternote for this volume, because I tried to organize it with Chris Coggins, but I don't have a paper in that. But it's try to get it. It's a very interesting book. It shows all over, and there's several collaborators there from India as well. They explore the frequently indigenous communities which continue to depend upon the disappearing forest resources, and which they have traditionally protected by sanctifying them through their cosmological systems and with their deep knowledge of local ecology. Yunnan in southwest China is home to 24 ethnic minorities, much like our northeast of India. Uh, and they live in forested hills and mountains. And it happens to be the cradle of environmental activism, Yunnan. But it is also relatedly the cradle of massive deforestation and dam projects. So we won't have a chance to talk about how both of those are happening in Yunnan, because I want to get to the Yunnan is the source of the Mekong, or which they call in China the Lansang, which comes from a great height rushing down, which is why they also the Salween, the Mekong, and so on are so important for dams, because there's enormous velocity. Yunnan forest and diversity. I think I don't have time to go through this. Maybe you can see it later. But what I want to say mainly in this is that deforestation was very rapid until 1982, when China's reforms decided that deforestation is bad for the society. And so they basically stopped the logging, but then at the same time, they also created plantations, rubber plantations, and so on, which leads to loss of biodiversity, as you know, monoculture does, and also many dams. They have, I think, built already 12, although I have a record of 9, 12 dams along the Mekong River. And even though, and to some extent, the protection was sought by declaring the Eastern Himalayan mountains as the UNESCO protected status. And most of the river basins there were supposed to be protected, but they still have dams on them, 12 dams, as I said, on the Chinese side of the Mekong. Um, at the same time, because there is uh, not logging is not permitted. In fact, logging is outsourced. Now, logging comes from nearby nations like Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam and other places, but also Canada and things. So it is, but at the same time, biodiversity is lost because these are now plantations. Okay, so these are just some idea of the people. You can see that they are very similar to the people of Northeast India. In fact, they are quite continuous with them. You might say they're part of Zomia, which was something that Jim Scott popularized. And this is the whole area of Yunnan here. Then that's Kunming. That's where the elephants came from, all the way from here to here. Are you guys still with me?
Yes,
Yes?
yes.
Okay, good. Because I can't see any of you. I don't have a, so we just do it this way. So I'm going to go to Southeast Asia soon, but I just want to talk about the Yunnan rivers and dams. In 2022, there were 6 large hydropower stations in China's upper Mekong, and a dozen or more are planned. I think that there are already 12 or 13. Now, in 2004, 13 of the dam rivers were opposed by very heavy Chinese civil society activism, which was permitted at that time. And these 13 rivers were opposed, and they were rescinded by none other than the Prime Minister of China, Wen Jiabao, in 2004. And uh, because of the activism of civil society, or 2003. And now, though, after he left, Wen Jiabao was also a geologist, so he understood the problems with these massive dams. I mean, you're talking about dams that that are effectively owned by some of the biggest multinational corporations in the world, like hydropower and several others that I have names. Now, habitat degradation and biodiversity loss takes place in both aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. Dam impoundment and reservoir creation has changed the sediment regimes. And we'll see this when we talk about the Mekong Delta, which is the end of the Mekong, which only the Delta part really goes through directly through Vietnam. The rest of it is Laos and Cambodia and Thailand. Okay, so it has changed the sediment regimes, it has changed the chemical and biophysical quality of the water. This year, in fact, it was very bad for Laos because there was huge flooding. Sometimes there's drought. And, since the dams are upriver, they can control how much water there is coming in and not. There are some agreements, but they don't always work. And most of these changes, the loss of forest, shrubs, agricultural lands, routes for migratory species, uh, are irreversible. Most of these changes are irreversible. And the government reports that 10 million people were relocated because of dams. But alternative Chinese estimates suggest that at least 22 million were relocated. And compensation, as in India, which often doesn't exist after dam building, it does exist in China, but it's been low and does not include embodied and relational wealth, right? That is the particular job skills, their local knowledge, and the communal relations that they have. All that is gone in a new setting. Without that, minorities often need to find new occupations as they lose their grazing and forest lands. Okay, here is something that that I have researched personally myself. I went to Cambodia. These are the protesters in the forests of Cambodia called avatars. They call themselves avatars. They're demonstrating to appeal to the government to save the Prelang forest. They occupy a place between the Mekong and the Tonle Sap, or the Great Angkor Wat area. And this is a very vital forest zone, certainly the biggest in Southeast Asia. And the community that lives there are the community, KUY. And let me show you a little bit beforehand. Key people in Prelang Forest is the largest lowland rainforest in mainland Asia. And the key people with their local knowledge use it for their livelihoods to tap resin, to produce medicine and food from this forest sustainably. Now, for over 20 years, I think 2002, there had been logging, massive logging in these forests. And this had led to regular protests. The key people used to come all the way down to Phnom Penh. That's a journey of several hours every weekend. And outside the main sort of communist um, uh, square, they would demonstrate. And then they got the idea, which is a very interesting circulatory link with indigenous peoples around the world, to borrow from the movie of called Avatar, which came out in 2010. And they depicted, I'm sure many of you have seen the film, uh, and they depicted themselves as these people, right? As the exploited non-people kind of in the forest zones. And they really developed a whole performance style of their own, putting on leaves and painting themselves green and having musical performances and petitions and so on. And they call themselves the avatars. And they started doing this after the movie came out in 2010. But I actually saw an item in the Singapore newspaper, and I said, I have to investigate this, that thousands and thousands of people had gathered now to see them, although they had been protesting for 10 years, it didn't matter. But once they put on this performative costume and call themselves avatars, the Dongria Kond is also, I think, used the term avatars for their protests. And people in Bolivia have also used the avatar term. So it's a very interesting notion of circulation, which is also why circulatory histories, which is also what interested me here. Because if you think of it, avatar is an ancient Hindu-Buddhist idea, and these people know all about it. They were led by Buddhist monks. Uh, but it has returned to make an impact. It has recirculated from Hollywood to make an impact upon their movement in Cambodia, as it has in India and other places, Bolivia and so on. So talk a little bit about I already mentioned they're logging over 20 years, and they actually, which was actually often led by Buddhist monks, right, in the area, and I'll show you some of them. They created an organization called the Prelang Community Network, PLCN. And this was begun with monks who ordinated trees. And what they did was, with this network, they were able to use cell phones and monitor logging along the forest, especially from the 2010s onwards. Motorcycles, phone apps, etc. And they were successful for many years in catching these logging activities. I actually visited Prelang in 2017. Not Prelang, I went to Phnom Penh, the capital, and the activists came. And they talked about their successes and their problems in preventing Chinese hydropower dams in an area nearby called Areng, or the Cardamom Forest. And their logging also, they were talking about their successes and failure. And for those 10 years, it was very successful, I think. The state law created registered NGO. But then what happens is that this is a Hun Sen government. This is an authoritarian government that's also interested in profits from the logging. But as you know, part of Enlightenment modernity is to conserve as well as profit. And often the profit motive dominates over the conservation motive, right? So in 2015, what they did, especially after the Hun Sen government recognized what was happening, was that they created a state law which registered legal NGOs. And Prelang Community Network was not considered a grassroots legal organization. And then in 2016, so they were able to arrest some of them. In 2016, the government converted much of their forests into a wildlife reserve, Prelang, into a national park, which prevented the key people from entering the reserve area. They use bits and pieces of things. They don't go logging, but they were now excluded from it. So, and in fact, what happened was that there are records showing that there has been rampant illegal commercial logging with local government collusion. 9,000 hectares of forest was lost just during 2020. 20% more trees were lost in 2020 than in 2019. So once they created this, and this also was a COVID period, so they logging continued at what should I say, at an accelerated rate. This is part of accelerating time. Oh, this is me, especially here with my little crown of my head. But some of these people are the same people who you saw protesting as avatars. Now, these two monks are very interesting. This is Ven Banot, I think his name is, and this is Venerable Salut. Venerable Bun Banot speaks perfect English. He studied in Pune for a long time and is in the member of parliament and knows Hun Sen and probably his son now, Hun Then, and he talks like that. And so he's the sort of outward face of this organization. This Venerable Bun is the real force behind all these activities. He doesn't speak any English, but he is a really dedicated and committed monk to his people and to the natural environments. And this is how you see the trees being ordinated. There are other pictures too, but we may have too many farms. This is the place called the cardamom forest, Ilaichi forest. Arang community expels so these people got together and expelled the investigators who went to survey the site for their dams in Arang forest. And they created all these obstacles. And there was, there was support also from, here's a monk and here's a foreigner. There was support also from foreign NGOs and so on, which is probably stopped now, like everywhere else. Dams in Southeast Asia. Today, China has the most developed renewable energy. But China epistemic engine also builds major dams and deforestation in Southwest and Southeast Asia. Similarly, I would say it's not just China. Most states in Monsoon Asia, including India, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, simultaneously create protected areas, conservation areas, while conducting massive extractive and hydropower projects. So this is the irony. It's almost as if, you have to save a little bit or do something about it in order to salve the epistemology of the Enlightenment, but which has a positive side, but its negative side, which is the conquest of nature, seems to take over. There are now more than 100 hydropower dams which have recently been constructed across the Mekong River basin, dramatically increasing reservoir storage capacity from 5 to 70 cubic kilometers. China has already built 9 dams upstreams, I think 12 now, on the Lansang. What it calls the Mekong in its area is the Lansang, in its territory, while Lao PDR, which has decided that the only way it can have growth is to create dams. And it's not a very big country, so it has how many dams in its? It has 16 dams on its tributaries, with many more in the building and planning stages. Now, Chinese multinational powers like Huaneng, Three Gorges Dam Corporation, which is one of the biggest, SDIC, State Development of Industry of Corporation, are often involved with local governments in building dams. So everybody is involved. Also, there are other Asian companies and multinational companies, European in particular, which the potential profits and debt servicing to international financial companies. They are, huge global water market exchange. So there's very little relationship between the people who are suffering at the dams and the people who are profiting, because they may be in some European water market being sold because it's not making enough electricity or whatever it is. And they get nothing off it, right? So debt servicing tends to drive uh, these companies who are managing or building the dams to make financial rates of return of power output override all other priorities in the construction of dams. Here we can see the imperatives of the epistemic engine. This is the profit that they have to make. You have to make a certain amount of water flow to create certain amount of electricity for distant places. And then this, of course, these water flow are converted into shares or derivatives or whatever, and is sold and resold and resold. So ultimately, the lives of the people and affected by this, it has nothing to do. There's a disconnect between them and the water market. So here you are. This is the Mekong and Salween River basins. And these are the dams. It says a very few red ones have been canceled. The orange ones were planned. The dark blue ones have been commissioned, and the black ones are proposed. And I also want you to see this lake, Tonle Sap Lake. This is Angkor Wat around here. These are the people who occupy this is the Mekong, basically. This is the Mekong Basin. And these are the Cree people who occupy the Prelang forests. And I also want you to note that the Mekong here comes around and it comes through here to the middle of Laos and Cambodia. And but it ends up in this little tail of Vietnam. So the delta is this, which is a very fertile delta, which had been built up over 7,000 years and now is being built down and will go under the sea in probably less than 50 years. The river as seen by the epistemic engine. So I talked about financial companies and the engineers and other planners who are part of this epistemic engine and dam building. The PRC, Lao, PDR, and other states in the region view the water resources as the source of their essential and highly profitable hydropower necessary for the development of the nation. Of course, this goes to urban areas mostly and industry. State planners, engineers, developers, technocratic elites engaged with dam planning principally for hydropower appear not to see the multi-dimensional losses that occur to the ecosystem and the ecosystem services of the river basin, or to the multitudes of people who are affected by these losses and receive little, if any, benefit from it. Moreover, because sometimes, after 2000, the World Commission of Dams, NGOs are allowed to go and sit with these planners to make sure that they stay within certain limits. But because these rivers cross or form national territorial boundaries, they have multi-scale effects, right? They don't seem to care about how changes on one part of this 800,000 kilometer river, Mekong River basin, affects the river in another part, which is outside their jurisdictional scale, or in another country, which is still further outside. So hydropower alters perhaps irreversibly the hydrology of the ecosystem by decimating fish stocks, preventing natural fertilization of the floodplains, inundating agriculture and forest lands, and promoting saline intrusion into the Mekong Delta. How am I doing for time? Any responses? 15
Yes,
minutes?
sir. Please go ahead. Yes, 15 minutes.
Okay. Now I want to talk about the lake, which is called Tonle Sap. I don't know how many of you have been there. I have been on it, and I've been on the boat in there, and the Mekong Delta. The Tonle Sap Lake in Cambodia, the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia, connected to the Mekong by the Tonle Sap River, before the former forms the delta and enters the sea. I told you that. The livelihood of the people that live on and around this lake is dependent on the annual flood pulse. So it's not a constant lake as we see in different places. It really represents a certain seasonal lake, which can increase from about sea level to 26 feet high until the autumn season. And that is because the Mekong, when it comes to a certain part between Cambodia and Vietnam, it washes back if it has enough water. And this was considered part of the seasonal uh, culture of the area. And there were festivities and so on when the Tonle Sap lake rises by as much as 26 feet until the fall when it starts to drain again, and an event that the Cambodians mark with a 3-day festival of boat races and fireworks. It is actually a very interesting area. The 2019 mark, however, saw the rise not going to 26 feet, which is 25, 26 is the normal, but becoming 10 feet below normal. So these are being affected very seriously. Meanwhile, if we go to the Mekong Delta, which is very fertile, supports 17 million people, and produces about 1/3 of the world's rice trade, is itself in danger of subsiding and going undersea because of the blockage of the flow of sediment and because of the building of dams all over it, which blocks sediment and organic materials due to sand building and also sand mining. Sand mining now is a big issue. You need sand for cement and things like that. So the Mekong River really needs to be seen in a whole basin perspective in order for it to become more healthy or to adapt, but which includes several governments. And the Chinese government is not a part of the Mekong River Basin Commission, but does play a role. Here's a sort of, this is not the best pictures, but you do have to, they live in these, you see how high these houses are? They're built, they're adapted for the rise of that water. And then they can just create these and get tons of fish. I love this picture of these trees now, which also are, I think these are mangrove, maybe not. But they certainly flourish in this flooded region for a certain time. Now, just to come to this map, you see that this is the Tonle Sap River. This is the Vietnam Delta, right? And you can see from this legend here how much of it is already below sea level and how much is at sea level. So the dark blue here, this is below sea level. This is below sea level. And the lighter blue is just 0 to 1 feet under sea level or above sea level, 1 to 2 and so on. So this goes on, and you see what a dense network this is. This is of roads and canals and so on. I've also been here, and but it's beautiful, but it is a very dense network of communication and irrigation, which is being very seriously affected. So there is activism also on the Mekong River. There was a Mekong River Commission that was originally created by the USA during the Cold War as a kind of to build dams, in fact. But what happened is, ever since 1990, civil society began to appear in very powerful ways in places like Myanmar, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, and even South China, as I said, until 2013 was the golden age of green NGOs. And Cambodia had a lot of international NGOs during that period. And they and the local people, what happened in a letter signed by over 200 civil society groups and others from the Mekong and neighboring countries in 2007 launched a scathing critique of the extraordinary abdication of responsibility on the part of the Mekong River Commission. And in 2008, they held a conference called Mekong Mainstream Dams, People's Voices Across Borders, held in Bangkok, and presented a report that effectively articulated the normative role and responsibilities of the Commission. These civil society groups have been increasingly pressed by the Mekong River Commission to adhere to the more inclusive, pressing the Mekong River to the more inclusive and sustainable priorities and procedures of the World Commission of Dams, adumbrated around 2000, which said smaller dams, dams that don't affect all this and so on. Behind the commission, of course, looms the role of China, of corporates and state power together with local state elites, whom they are who are very committed to growth over everything else, and that means profit very often over everything else. And they cannot always, they have made striking successes, but not always. I just want to talk about, I think I can skip this. Where's my local knowledge? I'll just talk about this and then conclude. So there is one very interesting example of local knowledge in Thailand, on the Thai-Vietnam, on the Thai-Laos border, on the Mekong River. The Mekong River creates the division between Thailand and Northeast Thailand and Laos. So this, just as Mekong Basin and Mekong activism is transboundary, so are the local communities and practices. In northern Thailand, in an area called Changkung district, and this is the case of the Rak Changkung, with the association of Changkung, I think that's what Rak means, district on Thai, which is on the border. And traditionally, these borders were not that important, but these communities across the river had shared fishing zones by agreements between themselves, sanctioned by what the Thai concept of Dhammachat, which is dharma, really, that the inseparability of humans and nature, which allowed them to share reasonably the fish. Because what these people had was, why it's so slippery. What the people had was an intimate knowledge, because these are rushes, right? These are rapids. They come down from the mountains and so on, the Mekong waters. And they have intimate knowledge of some of the deep pools that also exist within these rapids. And these are the pools where the rivers, where the fish spawn, right? And so they know these areas, and they have an agreement about who uses which area within this watery, boundaryless surface, right? So this is a kind of deep local knowledge. Now, and they were sharing it even after the boundary was formed and so on. But then in the 2000s, China wanted to expand this river to allow, to blow up this river banks to allow the shipping of goods all the way from Kunming to Southeast Asia. And that would mean that that it would lose the pools with the rapids. It would become a much more even and probably have more destructive influences, but suddenly they would lose part of their livelihood and the way in which they use their local knowledge. So, so it planned to slow the rapids for shipping navigation by blasting river banks. Now, there was a very famous leader in that district by the name of Niwat Raikyo. I think he's known as through Sri, no, Sri Kuru, which could possibly mean, I'm not sure, Sri Guru. He was also a teacher. Niwat Raikyo, he had been involved in the big Mekong activism. He had been involved. And in fact, I just looked him up recently. He was involved in stopping a Chinese dam in this area in 2020. So he petitioned the Thai Senate and had the project canceled in 2003. Meanwhile, the fish was reduced. The community improved, even though the fish was reduced because of other developments, because of so many other dams. The community improvised their historical luang. They changed their plans along the river so that instead of giving segments of the river, which were pools, they were given temporal zones. Okay, so you can fish with this many boats for this many hours during this time, and we will fish for these many hours at this time. And within us, these groups will fish at different times. So these arrangements were more formal and involved new ideas of boundary territoriality. They were still close to the idea of Dhammachat. At the same time, they created this modern organization called Rak Changkung. But while they create, and this modern organization was right to publicize to the world that we have managed to, that we are protesting, that we want to live in these communities. And they have a school, Mekong School of Local Knowledge, that they have created with a museum and traditional ecological knowledge with measurements, habits, spawning seasons, etc., all in this museum, Mekong School of Local Knowledge, where others also come to study in this. And at the same time, whereas the Thamachat was important earlier, they intensified their Buddhist ceremonies in the temples, rocks, and waters. So they have, in some ways, realized the power of local knowledge, of going through local knowledge in resisting the epistemic engine. Okay, I will skip all this because I just go to. What I want to say is that what they have tried to do is, I mean, ultimately it turns out to be two groups of people who are involved. One are the local indigenous communities or local communities who are directly affected by it. And there are environmental activists and NGOs, and sometimes even state agencies that are committed to their thing. So nobody's to be excluded because you can join in from the public sphere, from the epistemic engine, or you can go on from outside, right? So what they do is they have created a certain kind of sacrality around nature as an alternative authority. The sacrality is created by the local people who do believe in their cosmology and which talks about much more continuum between nature and people. But there's also kind of a new sacrality being produced by the modern conservation groups, right? By the modern environmental groups, not necessarily government conservation. And these modern environmental groups have been responsible for 160,000 areas of legally protected areas. So they can take it into world courts and so on. And 1,000 World Heritage Sites. Some of them are cultural, but most of them are natural. And about 12% of the Earth's land is, uh, is held to be protected. And in some ways, we can say that this protection, when you cannot do something, is a kind of a sacrality, right? I mean, sacrality is that it's inviolable. You cannot violate it. And we have sacred forests in India as well. And so this is a kind of, but it's from a modern perspective. So they're the kind of two things coming together: the local indigenous groups and the segment of environmentalists who are also outside the epistemology of the Enlightenment and believe in the continuum of nature, but they also recognize that they have to be part of the epistemic engine's civil activity and engage in those civil activities in order to be successful, at least partially move this. Now, some people are very critical of this collaborative agency because they say that the indigenous people are using instruments or weapons that are not, I mean, metaphorical weapons that are not native or indigenous to their cosmology. The formulation of rights is what is being used, right? Rights of nature, rights of indigenous people. But the rights concept, if you note, comes out of the Enlightenment, has both John Locke and people, has both. It is intended to protect property, private property, and at the same time to protect communities. It can be extended to do that. So the critique is that the rights is susceptible to the critique of epistemic violence against indigenous local communities. And there are many contradictions. I noticed it in Prelang when I went. Many contradictions between modern conservation agencies and local communities. Local communities do not have the exclusive concept of environment or nature. The element of knowledge and practice pertinent to modern environmentalism or conservation comes in a package with a variety of beliefs that is not consonant with the latter. Historically now, I want to say that communities have always adapted to their changed environment with available cultural and political resources. In this context, the two sides have to adapt to one another so that the pertinence conserves interests of local communities embedded and their knowledge embedded in modern conservation programs. Uh, so just to the last slide. So rights doctrine sanctions both property, private property, as well as protection of communities, though the former is much more powerful as a pillar of the epistemic engine, right? Civil society movements do not often defy the humanist ideology that comes out of the humans versus nature that comes out of the Enlightenment, but they often seek to compartmentalize these inviolable regions or protected regions as a strategy, right? So some of them come through this, go into the epistemic engine, and then try to shape the world order. Some go directly, indigenous people often go directly, but they're now being brought increasingly into the United Nations. There are United Nations commissions for, so, they're being changed in many ways as well, but hopefully it's changed for the better. Of course, as I said, there are problems with now the indigenous and local communities, the collaborative agencies seek to intervene politically and in global politics directly and through the epistemic ideology of rights. Of course, there are problems with indigenous and civil society movements. The global environmental movement has to operate within to stretch the Enlightenment episteme and also go beyond the place centrality of nature, go beyond to place centrality of nature in the global environment. Okay, I think I took an hour, so I'll stop here. Am I on?
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Duara. So I had a bit of a internet problem, but finally I'm connecting. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation. So now
Oh, I'm glad.
uh,
Yeah.
now I invite Professor Brishan to kindly share your chairperson's comments, and then
Okay.
we would have comments and reflections from our audience.
Okay. For how long? For half an hour or so?
You know, you have to leave. So, Professor Duara, another 15 minutes for you.
15 minutes. And give me 1 minute to get some water. My
Yes,
throat is parched. My wife is going to eat.
So in the meantime, I can think a little bit about my comment on the function I'm having here. Saying,
Okay, I have some water here. Come, let's start.
okay.
Should I go back to Zoom? I should, right? Okay, we can't see each other, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Luckily, I can see you now. So thank you, Professor Duara, for your very intriguing presentation. I like your presentation very much. Maybe
Thank you.
I mentioned already that I, together with some colleagues from Vietnam, China, and other countries, have been working on the topic of the Mekong River. So basically, that is what we were concerned about, is not so much the environmental degradation. This is a rather well-studied topic, but we were more interested in the collaboration, the different levels of collaboration in the entire area. And our basic finding is that the Mekong is a segmented river, which is not perceived by the local population or even by the regional population as one river, because the river has very different segments. So you have the river in the Tibetan Plateau, you have the river in Yunnan, you have the upstream river, say in Myanmar, in northern Thailand, in parts of Laos. Then the river goes to the rapids, then you have the Tonle Sap area, and then you have the delta area, which starts in Phnom Penh, so in Cambodia already. So in both terms, by perception, by biology, by geology, by hydrography, this is a very different river. Means that if we have a concept of the entire river, this is a long way to go, because the Mekong River, unlike many other rivers, was never something like a river used for human traffic. It was not connecting people, it was disconnecting people. That is the reason which it makes so very complicated to have a common understanding of the entire greater Mekong area.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that we address the topic more from, let's say, the governmental organizations, and we found that there are many initiatives coming from different, say, governmental organizations. So there are initiatives regarding the Mekong River Commission, which I think is absolutely right. Mekong River Commission is a very weak organization compared, for example, to River Rhine Commission here in Europe or the
Yes.
Danube Commission. Danube Commission was even working during the Cold War. Yeah, that is something which is Mekong River Commission was basically established by the Americans, and then it was partly forgotten, and it was revitalized in the 1990s. So then we have Japanese initiatives, we have American initiatives. We also have a very important role which the European Union plays in the entire area, and of course we have China. And this makes the entire situation so extremely complicated, because then again, because of the high fragmentation of the entire area, there is no common understanding of the people of the river. Yeah. So my question then would be, do you see that from these local initiatives, from the grassroots initiatives, which are coming up now in countries like Cambodia, perhaps, maybe Laos, maybe Thailand, and so on, you see that there is something emerging with the people in the entire area of a common understanding of the river, and that the river has to be protected, not in terms of local initiatives, but in say by a big international initiative to save one of the most precious river environments, not only in Asia but in the global perspective.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very interesting question. You recall that at one point I talk about this has to be addressed as a whole basin perspective, and I know this because first, there are many people, I'm sure, in Thailand, in all of these countries, who are very well aware of the whole river, especially technical people and geographers and so on, or uh, yeah, hydromorphologists and so on. I know one of them whose name I'm forgetting. He's a very famous Berkeley professor who is working precisely on this. And he has been talking a lot about, with the local scientists, about the whole river, addressing the whole river basin. And the Mekong Commission could have worked, could have responded, but right now China is just a bystander, or is a, what do they call it? It just participates not as a member, as an outsider.
Sorry to interrupt. China participates by two southern provinces of China. So not the entire. So not the entire people. Not the entire People's Republic is a part of the Mekong River Commission, but two provinces, I think.
Probably Yunnan and Guangxi. Guangxi. So but it participates, but it does not. It has not signed the full agreements. So it knows what's going on, and it does not easily transfer the exact information about how much water will be released, how much water will, and how this will affect the downstream. So the real problem here is Chinese control. And this, if you note, this is something that is common to all countries, or many countries, except perhaps in the European context, that control the river heads, right? So the Tibetan Plateau is now basically controlled by, all the rivers there are controlled by China. In Turkey, it also does not participate in river control mechanism because it controls two of the most important rivers. It has the thing. And some African countries also don't. I just don't have the exact names in my mind.
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia.
There's a big debate on the Blue Nile, actually. So there's a problem between Ethiopia and particularly Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt.
Egypt. because they've just created the Renaissance Dam, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
it's not at all clear if it's going to release the information about how much water is coming and going. And I
Mm.
don't know why the Chinese don't release it. You do have, I mean, in a sense, it's very clear. If there's too little water, they'll keep it for themselves. If there's too much water, they'll release it down, and and this year it happened. They released a lot of water on the Manwan Dam, and the Laos villages were flooded earlier this year. Of course, this year everything is happening. But I'm in North Carolina now, and half of it is destroyed.
Mm.
Luckily, we're okay. Yeah, so yeah, I agree with you that you need whole river basin agreements to work out these things, but it's getting almost too late as all these dams are being built, and it's highly unlikely that these regimes will, the US and the West is now, uh, because they were on an earlier path, they're now destroying these old dams and trying to manage without them. But in Asia, we see the reverse. So who knows how long it can last, how long anything can last. But that was a very good question. Thank you. Yeah. But I was also, hoping that people would notice that how local communities do have, and they can join forces. I mean, there is a pathway. I don't know if it's strong enough, but there is a pathway.
My second point is that you have been talking about the rationality of intervention. I think if you look at Laos, for example, at the
Yeah.
moment they're building quite a lot of dams, in particular in Laos, and not say in the river itself,
But
but
tributaries.
but the tributaries, and especially in the so-called Indochina Cordillera, for example.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
the official argument is not so much about water management, it's rather about electricity production.
yeah,
The problem is that if you look into the amount of illicit electricity that could be produced by these dams,
yeah.
the problem might be that Laos will not need all that electricity.
No, it's for export.
And also the neighboring countries will not need that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
some people say, like my friend Vanari Chang uh, from Singapore has worked on that. He would say it's basically about corruption. Yeah,
Ah,
you
it's
you
even
build
worse.
dam, you build
Yeah,
dams, big dams, because
yeah,
you can distribute a lot of money. Say a
yeah.
smaller dam product is already something like 3 billion euro. And if you have
Mm,
3 billion euro to distribute, you can go up to 600 million euro or even more. You can
mm,
put into dark channels. So
mm,
basically, and that is maybe that's a part of the fight between the different powers on influence on countries like Laos. Well, at the
mm,
moment, it's looking like that there's one clear winner in that situation, and that is China. China is
mm,
getting stronger every year, but also
mm,
the other powers are also buying, for
mm,
example, Laotian politicians in terms of wrapping them with money, and then they produce that kind of project because they need some
mm.
legitimation for that in their home countries. So you
Yeah.
think would be my questions about the entire rationality of that process. Is
Mm.
it really that, say, it's about, say, a profit in terms of good capitalism, or would you say it's more a power game on influence in
Yeah.
the entire area?
Well, I agree with that, but I think it's a distribution of profits. That's why I think that the epistemic engine, ultimately it has to produce a certain amount of energy, and these kinds of water energy are transferred into shares, a lot of which is pre-distributed, as you say, in corruption, but then ultimately it goes into the global water markets, who also gain. So they have to push on this profit thing as well. So um, so I don't know where the electricity is finally going. Maybe they do not, but certainly its profitability level is dependent on that.
Mm-hmm.
Is because I've read a book by I don't have it here right now. Whittington. You know Jerome Whittington?
Yes,
He
yes, yes.
spent. You do know his work?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
on it's on a smaller dam on a tributary. We had a conference and he presented there. He talked about corruption, but he was much more interested in how what seemed to override everything else was the amount of electricity, energy being generated per unit of per cusec or whatever they call whatever the unit is. Yeah. So that's
Mhm.
so rationality. I don't make that kind of. I think profits, whether it's been had through leakage or through working through. Yes, maybe I should make that distinction. Thank you. That's important. I'm sure that the corruption information is available everywhere. Yeah. Is it?
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay.
Is it available everywhere? The corruption information?
Corruption for information is available, of course. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
particularly it's a problem, of course, in countries
that's right.
we talk about at the moment. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I think this are a few remarks on this very wonderful
Thank you very
presentation.
much. Very
And
much.
I think
Yeah,
there will be
very
more
useful.
questions to come. I think there will be more questions to come.
Thank you. And in the meantime, yes, Professor Sharma. Now, Professor Duara, you may be leaving in 5 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Let, let me introduce Professor Amit Kumar Sharma.
Ah,
So he is one of the recipients of our Confucius Buddha Gandhi uh, Vishwanidam Award, which we are
ah.
giving this year.
Oh,
So
excellent.
this year we have presented it to 3 scholars,
Yeah.
and one is located in the University of British Columbia,
Yeah.
scholar on education, and her name is Alice Chu. Professor Amit Kumar Sharma is professor at the Center for Study of Social Systems, JNU, and
Ah,
Professor Xia from National Kaohsiung University, Taiwan.
ah.
So,
Okay.
so
You're going to have comments from all of them?
no, there we are presenting our awards to them, and
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
two of the scholars could not join us virtually, but Professor Sharma is here.
Okay.
Now, yes, Amit, please, Amit, yes. Now, at this moment, I request you to ask a question to Professor Sharma, Professor Duara, and then we would request your acceptance speech after 5 minutes. We will have a little discussion on Professor Duara's lecture, and then we would have your acceptance speech.
I have no question. I just want to thank the speaker and the chair. But I think there is one dimension which was somehow neglected
Uh-huh.
because of paucity of time,
Yeah.
and that is the increasing role of military society in
Ah.
the
Yeah.
post-corona world. Corona gave an opportunity to the military,
Yeah.
particularly in South Asia, and they are, distancing themselves from the civil, the
Yeah.
state, nation state,
Uh,
and they are more collaborating with the indigenous people and the civil society. This is something unprecedented because nobody was talking about military society after Herbert Spencer. There is a
mm,
need to, inquire and explore, how the global warming, how the increasing rate of raining,
mm,
how the nature's, protest against the development of the humans is
yeah.
being mediated by the military society.
And you're saying that the military society cooperates more with indigenous and local society? Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah. I'm saying not only in India, in Pakistan and Bangladesh and Nepal, but also in other places. You know, the situation has drastically changed after the corona pandemic.
Yeah. No, but
Corona
what
pandemic
I
was
have,
something.
do you have some, because in China, to some extent, it's opposite. It's the state kind of militarized the COVID protection people, not necessarily with guns, but they were banging into homes and so on, and they were playing a much more. That was during COVID. So, but I would like some real evidence of this collaboration with local indigenous and local communities, because all I remember, I know, of course, the Pakistan floods of about 3 years ago. Of course, the military was also involved, but that is a kind of a not necessarily collaborating with local societies. So do you have a writing piece? Have you written a piece, or do you know of pieces that I can look at? Because this is very interesting.
Actually, I was also professor of national security, and it is in that connection that I was, looking after museums and the archives which the military has been keeping. It is not very open for the people outside the military society. The military establishment is very close. What I wanted to hint at is that the intervention or participation of Pakistani military has been as old as Pakistan. But
Yeah.
in India, before the corona pandemic, the military society restrained from taking a deep interest in the civil society movement against the state. But
Against
it
this.
is increasingly coming. And I have the data, but of course, because I collaborate with Home Ministry and Defense Ministry, therefore these
Cannot
are not
share it.
published material. I think the international agencies in other countries like China, USA, and Russia may be collecting data. Indian state has, accepted this reality that they cannot fight with nature, with the European Enlightenment paradigm, and they have just surrendered to the nature. And in this surrender, the military society is very deeply rooted in Indian culture due to the influence of cinema on the military and due to the religious fervor of the Indian military. The role of cinema should be explored to differentiate the military in Pakistan and other places in India. Why there is no military coup in India? One of the major reasons for that is, the indigenization of military training in India, and it is unexplored in the academia. I was just extending your argument, Professor. I have no question. I was mesmerized by your presentation. It was really very good.
Well, thank you very much, and congratulations on your award. And I'm afraid I have to go now, but these are very useful comments, and I will look into them because this is an ongoing project by both professors. It has been very useful. So, and I also want to
thank you, sir. Thank you,
Ananta, for his managing this, for inviting me, hosting me. I'm sorry that the internet behaved badly, but at least I was heard out. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
It was very good, Professor.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Pranam.
Bye. Pranam.